Hello, everyone. Welcome to Z Time. We do zombie stories for survivors. Thanks for listening. On with the tale. I didn't notice the end of the world at first. That's the part nobody ever talks about, the way it doesn't announce itself. No sirens, no speeches, no moment where everyone looks up at the same time and understands something's wrong. It just drifts in, like bad weather you ignore, because you've lived under worse. I was 26, living in Compton, a few blocks off Alameda, close enough to hear the freeway, but far enough that it blended into background noise. Sirens were normal. Helicopters were normal. Police tape was normal. If the world was ending, it had a hard time standing out. I worked nights at a warehouse near the rail yard, loading pallets, clocking out tired, mind blank. During the day, I slept light and shallow, the way you do when a neighborhood never fully shuts up. The first thing that changed was the stores. Compton Market stayed open, but the shelves started thinning. Not empty, just uneven. No rice one day, no bottled water the next. Canned stuff pushed forward like they were trying to look fuller than they were. People joked about it at first. Supply chain, man. Some new flew overseas. Media hyping it. I believe them. Everyone did. You don't assume the worst when life already trains you to expect inconvenience. The food truck was parked behind the market, like always. It wasn't mine, not really. It belonged to an older guy named Luis who ran tacos out of it 6 days a week. Bright paint, faded lettering, generator bolted underneath like an afterthought. It smelled like grease even when it was cold. That truck was invisible. People walked past it without seeing it. Cops ignored it. Gang dudes ignored it. It wasn't worth stealing. Didn't look drivable, didn't scream value. It was just there. At the time, I didn't think twice about it. That came later. The second thing that changed was the noise. Not louder, wrong. Helicopters started hovering longer, not moving on, just hanging there, rotors chewing the air. Sirens overlapped more than usual, stacking instead of spacing out. Then one night, driving home past Rosecrans, traffic stopped dead. Not slowed, stopped. People got out of their cars. That never happens. Not here. You sit and wait, or you turn around. You don't step into the street. Someone was screaming near the intersection. Not angry, not drunk, panicked. I turned around and went home the long way. Still didn't think zombies. Nobody does. The news stayed calm longer than it should have. Isolated incidents. Unconfirmed reports. Authorities urged residents to remain indoors. That last one stuck with me. They don't say indoors unless something's outside. I started sleeping lighter. Started noticing things. A guy wandering down Central Avenue at 3 a.m, barefoot, bleeding, not reacting when a car honked at him. Someone slumped against a bus stop for hours without moving. A smell metallic, wrong, near the storm drains after it rained. People filmed it, uploaded it, laughed at it. Still open, Compton Market sign said. Still open. The night it clicked for me. I wasn't trying to be smart. I was just tired. Luis hadn't shown up to open the truck that day. Or the next. The market owner taped a handwritten sign to the window. Close until further notice. That's when people started taking things. Not looting, testing. Seeing what they could get away with. I walked behind the building. Same path I always took to cut through, and stood there looking at the truck. Quiet, dark, door shut, generator cold, steel walls. No windows, really, just service hatches. Locks that weren't pretty but weren't flimsy either. It hit me then, not like a lightning bolt, but like a math problem finally balancing. That truck didn't look like shelter. It looked like trash, which meant nobody wanted it. That night, I didn't go home. I slept in the food truck, on the floor, wrapped in my jacket, heart pounding every time something moved outside. But nothing did. And when morning came, the world was still falling apart, but I was still alive. And for the first time since things started going wrong, I felt like I'd found something solid in the middle of all that chaos. An oasis nobody else believed in yet. Still in silence, the first thing I learned about hiding is that it isn't about disappearing. It's about not announcing yourself. The food truck taught me that. During the day, it looked abandoned, paint chipped, tires half soft, grease stains baked into the concrete beneath it. No plates worth stealing. No cab worth joyriding. It didn't look like a vehicle anymore. It looked like a fixture, like a dead thing nobody bothered to move. That mattered, because even before people started turning, Compton knew how to read value. You could tell what was worth taking by what got hit first. Jewelry stores, pharmacies, gun shops, liquor stores after dark, then houses with nice cars out front, then houses with lights. Nobody ever looked twice at a food truck behind a market that wasn't even open. So I decided to make it mine, not by claiming it, but by quietly improving it. Locks the doors came first. Food trucks are built to keep honest people honest, not desperate people out. The service hatches had padlocks. Cheap ones, sun-faded, and probably keyed the same as 100 others. I didn't remove them. That was important. Removing locks tells a story. Someone is here. New locks shine. They catch the eye. They make people curious. Instead, I reinforced from the inside. The truck had storage racks welded along the walls. I scavenged angle iron from a busted shopping cart corral and bolted it across the inside of the main service hatch, using the existing bolt holes, so I didn't have to drill fresh ones. From the outside, the lock still dangled loose and cheap. From the inside, the door wasn't going anywhere without tools and time. The rear door was heavier, but the hinges were exposed. I wedged a steel rod to the hinge brackets, jammed it so tight I had to hammer it loose when I tested it. Again, nothing visible from the outside. Security isn't about strength. It's about effort required. If something takes more than 30 seconds, most threats move on. Light, disciplined light will get you killed faster than noise. Noise fades. Light carries. The first night I slept in the truck, I almost made that mistake. Pulled out my phone, screen glowing like a flare in the dark. Reflected off stainless steel, bounced everywhere. I shut it off immediately and just sat there, letting my eyes adjust. After that, I covered the inside surfaces with what I could find. Cardboard flattened from produced boxes, duct taped over the metal panels. Not pretty, but it killed reflections. I hung a blanket behind the cab wall, so nothing leaked through the seams. Any light I used stayed low, pointed at the floor, dimmed as far as it would go. No candles, no open flame, no flicker. I learned to do everything by feel, counting steps, memorizing where things were stored. I practiced opening and closing containers slowly, controlling every sound. At night, the truck became a cave, and caves survive. Noise is trickier. You don't realize how loud you are until you're trying not to be. Breathing, shifting weight, fabric rubbing against metal. The click of a zipper sounds like a gunshot when you're tense enough. I patted the floor with rubber mats scavenged from a gym that had already been torn apart. Heavy, smelled like sweat and bleach. Perfect. Anything that could rattle, I wedged or removed. Loose utensils, empty cans. The generator underneath, I disconnected it entirely. No power was worth the risk. Silence became a habit. I ate cold food, drank slowly, slept light. The truck never announced itself. Why the truck worked? Because it didn't promise safety. It promised time. Steel walls meant no windows to break, no glass noise. Tight quarters meant fewer angles of attack. The roof was solid enough to stand on, but not inviting. No ladder, no obvious access. It wasn't worth burning, wasn't worth forcing, wasn't worth noticing. And that's the sweet spot in a city like this. Not strong enough to challenge, not weak enough to exploit. Outside, things changed slowly. The illness didn't roll in like a wave. It crept. A guy at the bus stop coughing too hard, then vomiting, then just sitting there long after everyone else moved away. An ambulance that came and never left. Police cruisers parked crooked, doors open, lights still flashing hours later. Hospitals filled quietly at first, then loudly. People argued online about what it was. Flu, drugs, a hoax, a weapon, something racial, something political, something always somewhere else. Meanwhile, South Central went on like it always had, until it didn't. Gang activity didn't stop. It sharpened. Crews moved heavier, traveled tighter, less show, more purpose. I saw guys I recognized carrying rifles they didn't used to have, taped magazines, eyes scanning rooftops instead of corners. That told me something important. They were scared, not of each other, of something new. Gunfire became more common, but shorter, less bravado, more execution, no warning shots. And then one night I heard screaming, not arguing, not threats, screaming that ended wrong, followed by silence. The first ones I saw up close I watched in the truck. Through a crack I hadn't sealed yet, a man stumbled down the alley behind the market, dragging one leg, shirt soaked dark, head twitching like he couldn't quite control it. He ran into a dumpster and didn't react, just leaned into it, teeth chattering. Another man followed him. This one moved fast, too fast. When he hit the first guy, it wasn't a fight. It was feeding, biting, pulling. No hesitation, no sound except wet tearing, and a low animal noise I felt more than heard. The first guy stopped screaming almost immediately. The second didn't stop eating. That's when it became real. Not sick, not violent, gone. The city had just by the end of the week. People stopped helping strangers. By the second week, they stopped stopping. Cars hit bodies and didn't slow down. Sirens faded entirely. Fires burned until they ran out of things to consume. The gangs didn't collapse. They adapted. Roadblocks went up on certain streets. Territory hardened. Outsiders disappeared. Gunshots echoed, followed by nothing. I stayed invisible. Every night, I checked the locks, checked the seams, checked myself for noise, for light, for mistakes. The food truck sat quiet and unwanted behind a closed market, while Compton unraveled around it. An oasis, not because it was strong, but because it asked nothing from anyone passing by. And in a city learning how to tear itself apart, that made all the difference. When you're ready. Chapter 3 can move into first scavenging runs by day, how he starts acquiring weapons from the aftermath of gang violence, near misses at test of truck security, or the first time a truck almost gets noticed, just point the direction. How he starts acquiring weapons from the aftermath of gang violence. And can you not have those headings for each section of the chapter? Just keep the style rolling along like a verbal story. Got it? No headings, no breaks that feel like an outline. Just the voice carrying it forward. I didn't go looking for guns. That's important. Not because I was trying to be moral about it, but because looking for guns gets you seen, and getting seen gets you killed. Early on, anyone openly hunting weapons stood out as either desperate or dangerous, and both kinds of people attracted attention they couldn't control. The guns came to me because violence was already happening, and violence leaves things behind. Compton didn't suddenly become a war zone. It was already one. What changed was a follow-through. Shootings used to end with sirens. Now they ended with nothing. Bodies stayed where they fell. Cars rolled away and didn't come back. Sometimes the shooters didn't even bother to check their work. The first time I realized that, it stuck with me. I was moving early, just after sunrise, when the city was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. Not peaceful, just emptied. I kept to the edges, walking slow, backpack light. Eyes up, I wasn't scavenging yet. Not really. More like mapping. Watching which streets still had movement, which ones smelled wrong, which corners felt like they were holding their breath. That's when I saw the car. A black Charger, half up on the curb near a liquor store that had burned out the night before. Driver's door open. Windshield spiderweb with bullet holes. No one inside. That alone would have been enough to make me keep moving. But then I saw the blood trail. It led from the driver's seat, across the sidewalk, and into the alley behind the store. Thick at first, then smeared, then dotted like someone had tried to run and failed. I waited. That was my rule. Wait longer than you think you need to. Nothing moved. No voices. No footsteps. No wet sounds. I followed the trail. The body was slumped against a chain-link fence, head tilted at a wrong angle, chest still. No twitching. No breathing. No sound. A clean kill, probably headshot, judging by the mess on the concrete nearby. He was young, early 20s. Familiar haircut. Familiar clothes. one of the local sets. I wasn't in that life, but you grow up knowing who's who just by proximity. The pistol was still in his waistband. That surprised me. I stood there longer, watching his hands, his chest, his face, waiting for the tell, any sign of that wrong movement I'd seen the night before. Nothing. When I finally stepped closer, it was slow, careful, every sense stretched tight. I didn't touch him at first, just nudged his shoe with my own, ready to jump back. Still nothing. I took the gun, didn't admire it, didn't check the brand, just eased it free and backed away, heart pounding so loud I was sure it could be heard down the block. Only when I was a good distance away did I look at it properly. Glock, compact, magazine still half full. I didn't feel lucky. I felt heavy. After that, I started noticing patterns. Gang violence wasn't stopping. It was becoming more decisive. Less warning, less cleanup. People shot and left where they fell. Sometimes the shooters themselves didn't make it far, either bitten mid-fight, dragged down by someone they thought was already dead. Those scenes were dangerous, but they were also predictable. Violence draws attention. Then it moves on. If I waited long enough, I could slip in after. I never approached fresh scenes, ever. If the blood was still wet, I kept moving. If the air smelled sharp and metallic, I backed off. If flies hadn't found it yet, it wasn't safe. Time was a filter. 3 hours, 4, sometimes a whole day. When I went back, I went light and fast. No lingering, no rummaging. One body, one weapon. Anything more was greed. The rifles came later. Those were harder, heavier, louder. The first AR I found was leaning against a wall inside a ransacked apartment near Wilmington. The front door had been kicked in, furniture overturned, bullet holes stitched across the drywall. 2 bodies inside. One human, one. Not anymore. The infected one was face down, skull split open like someone had ended it properly. The other had been bitten badly, neck, shoulder, hands. He bled out holding a rifle like he planned to keep fighting and just ran out of time. I stood there a long while, staring at that gun. Rifles change things. They give you reach. They give you confidence. Sometimes too much. I took it anyway. Stripped the sling. Took the magazines. Left everything else exactly where it was. No trophies. No souvenirs. Back at the truck, I cleaned everything methodically. Wiped down grips. Checked chambers. Learned each weapon slowly. Dry firing into nothing. Counting trigger pull. Memorizing weight and balance. No range time. No practice shots. Noise was a currency I couldn't afford. The gun stayed wrapped, hidden, quiet. They weren't protection yet. They were options. The city noticed guns disappearing. Not directly, but in the way people started moving differently. Less casual. More eyes. More attention. Armed civilians stopped posturing and started guarding. Gangs tightened their circles, moved in packs. Shot first and didn't ask questions later. I avoided all of it. I moved like a shadow between other people's chaos. At night, back inside the truck, I'd lie there listening to distant gunfire echo off concrete. Closer some nights, farther others. Sometimes it blended with screaming. Sometimes it blended with nothing at all. The food truck never drew attention. It never fired a shot. And because of that, it kept giving me what I needed most. Time. The first time I realized sound mattered, it wasn't dramatic. No jump scare. No sudden rush. Just a mistake. I was 3 blocks from the truck, cutting through a strip mall off Long Beach Boulevard that had been half abandoned even before things went bad. Gates down. Windows broken. Wind pushing trash in slow circles. The kind of place you stop noticing because it never really changes. I was inside a small electronics store, moving carefully, when my elbow caught a metal shelf. The sound wasn't loud, just a clatter. A single sharp ring as something light hit tile. I froze. At first, nothing happened. That almost fooled me. Then I heard it. Shuffling feet. Not close but not far either. A wet, dragging sound, like someone pulling something heavy that didn't belong to them anymore. It came from outside, down the row of stores. I waited. The sound got closer. Not fast, not purposeful, but directed. That's when it clicked. They weren't wandering anymore. They were listening. Before that, scavenging had been about timing and sight lines, avoiding crowds, reading movement, staying out of view. Sound had been secondary, annoying but manageable. Now it was the main threat. I started moving differently. Shoes came first. I ditched anything with hard soles and found a pair of worn-out sneakers with just enough give to quiet my steps. I tested every surface before committing weight: tile, broken glass, loose gravel. If it made noise once, I avoided it forever after. I stopped carrying loose gear. Everything got taped, tied, or padded. Zippers were replaced with knots. Plastic bottles wrapped in cloth. Metal never touched metal. When I opened doors, I leaned into them slowly, letting hinges complain in whispers instead of screams. If something resisted, I didn't force it. Forced things make noise. Noise makes company. The infected changed too. They didn't sprint unless close. They didn't plan, but they oriented, heads turning, bodies pivoting, arms lifting like they were reaching for something they couldn't see, but knew was there. I watched one from across the street once, standing in the middle of an intersection, unmoving. I dropped a glass bottle 2 lanes away. Its head snapped toward the sound instantly. No hesitation. That was enough to teach me everything I needed to know. Scavenging stopped being about finding things. It became about not alerting things. I switched to daylight almost exclusively, early morning, when the infected were still clustered where they'd settled overnight. I avoided enclosed spaces where sound bounced and carried. No more rummaging deep in stores. I hit edges, loading docks, back rooms already stripped, dumpsters that hadn't been worth searching before. I learned to use sound as a tool. Sometimes I'd toss something down an alley before crossing a street. Sometimes I'd tap a pipe lightly to see if anything answered. The responses were never subtle. If something was nearby, it made itself known quickly, and once you knew where they were, you could go where they weren't. The truck changed how I scavenged too. It wasn't just shelter anymore. It was an anchor point. Everything I brought back had to justify the risk and the noise it took to get it. No bulk, no clutter, no second chances. I cached supplies in quiet places close by, under loose concrete. Inside storm drains I marked with chalk only I could read. That way, if I had to drop everything and run, I wasn't losing it all. The city rewarded restraint. People didn't. Gunfire became a dinner bell. I saw it happen more than once. Armed civilians shooting at something they could have avoided, then panicking when more came. Screams followed, then nothing. After that, I only fired if there was no other option. The gun wasn't a solution. It was a last mistake. At night, inside the truck, I lay awake listening to how the city breathed now. Distant shuffles, occasional impacts. The way sound traveled farther without traffic, without crowds. The infected weren't everywhere, but they were patient, and they were learning in their own way. The food truck stayed quiet. Steel walls, no windows, no movement. I learned to breathe shallow, to shift slowly, to exist without announcing myself. The world outside was getting louder and dumber. I survived by becoming the opposite. It wasn't my noise that almost killed me. That's the part that still sticks in my throat when I think about it. I was doing everything right. Early morning, just after dawn. The kind of gray light where shadows stretch long, and the city hasn't decided what kind of day it's going to be yet. I'd moved farther than usual, south toward a cluster of small warehouses that sat quiet even before everything fell apart. Fewer people, fewer reasons for anyone to be there. Fewer exits, too. I knew that, but I went anyway. I was inside one of the smaller buildings, a place that used to store restaurant supplies, bulk flour, oil, paper goods. Most of it was gone, but not all of it. I'd already filled my bag with things that mattered. Salt, spices, sealed packets that hadn't been touched because they weren't obvious or flashy. I was almost done. That's when I heard the voice. Not shouting, not screaming, talking. A man, somewhere outside, maybe 20 yards away, muttering under his breath like he was trying to convince himself of something. His voice echoed off the concrete, bounced down the loading dock, wrapped around corners. I froze. People don't talk anymore unless they're scared, stupid, or desperate. Sometimes all three. The voice got louder, closer. He was arguing with someone I couldn't hear, words tumbling out fast and panicked. A second voice answered, sharper, higher. A woman. Then a third sound joined them. Footsteps. Dragging. Multiple. I moved without thinking. I slipped deeper into the building, ducked behind stacked pallets, eased myself down onto the floor. I didn't run. Running makes noise. I didn't breathe right away either, just held it until my chest burned. The voices moved closer. The man was yelling now, actual yelling, saying someone's name, cursing, telling them to hurry. That's when the infected came in. I didn't see them at first. I heard them, the wet slap of feet, the scrape of bone against concrete, a low moaning that rose into something sharper as the sound of human panic fed it. The man screamed. The woman screamed longer. Gunshots followed, wild, fast, uncontrolled. Each one cracked through the warehouse like a hammer. Every shot was a beacon. Every echo multiplied the problem. I counted 5 infected at first. Then more answered. I stayed still. That was the hardest part. Staying still while the world came apart 10 feet away. While gunfire roared and bodies hit the ground. While something slammed into a steel door hard enough to rattle the walls. One of the infected wandered close to where I was hiding. Close enough I could smell it. Rotten blood, and something sweet underneath that made my stomach turn. It dragged a foot, bumped into the pallet in front of me. I didn't move, didn't blink, didn't pray. The pallet shifted slightly. Wood creaked. The thing tilted its head. I thought that was it. Then another gunshot rang out, closer now. An infected turned away, drawn back toward the noise like iron to a magnet. I stayed crouched for a long time after the sound stopped. Long enough that the silence felt wrong. When I finally moved, I didn't look at the bodies, didn't check the faces. I slipped out the back, slow and quiet, every step measured. Halfway down the alley, I heard another scream, farther away this time. Someone else making the same mistake. I didn't go back for the rest of the supplies. I went straight to the truck. That night, inside the steel walls, I sat in the dark and let my hands shake. It wasn't the infected that scared me most. It was how easy it was for someone else's fear to become my death sentence. From then on, I treated every human sound like a loaded weapon, and I trusted my silence more than anyone's gun. I didn't start planning for the future because I felt hopeful. I started because surviving day to day was exhausting. Every morning felt like I was borrowing time I couldn't repay. Wake up, check the seams, listen, wait. Scavenge just enough. Return. Hide. Repeat. There was no margin. No buffer. If I twisted an ankle, if I got sick, if I made one bad call, I was done. That's not survival. That's gambling. The shift happened one morning when I woke up hungry in a way that didn't go away after eating. Not empty, worried. The kind of hunger that makes you count what you have instead of what you need. I took everything out of the truck and laid it on the floor. Every can, every packet, every bottle, every round of ammo. I didn't like what I saw, not because it was small, but because it was finite. Up until then, I'd been thinking in days, maybe a week, get through this stretch, ride it out, wait for something to change. But nothing was changing. The infected weren't disappearing. People weren't calming down. Power wasn't coming back. The city wasn't healing. This was the new shape of things. And the truck, my little steel miracle, wasn't planned by itself. It was a platform. I started by mapping, not with paper at first. Too risky to carry, too easy to lose, but in my head. Routes I'd walked, streets that stayed quiet, buildings that had already burned and wouldn't burn again, places the infected clustered and places they avoided for reasons I didn't understand yet. I learned patterns. They liked intersections. Wide spaces, anywhere sound carried cleanly. They avoided tight dead ends and less drawn in. That mattered. So did people. I marked gang territories mentally, not by colors or names, but by behavior, where bodies disappeared quickly, where gunfire meant backup instead of chaos, where nobody screamed because nobody survived long enough to. Those areas were off limits. Long-term survival isn't about courage. It's about subtraction. Food came next. Canned goods were a bridge, not a destination. Once they ran out forever. I started prioritizing things that didn't feel immediately useful: salt, oil, sugar, dry rice, beans. Anything that could stretch other food later. I learned to walk past what I wanted for what I'd need. That hurt. Water worried me more. Bottles were heavy and loud and visible. And they didn't last. I started scouting rooftops, drainage patterns, places where rain pooled without mixing with street runoff. I found a hardware store that hadn't been stripped completely and took filters, tubing, containers, things that looked boring enough to be ignored. The truck could carry weight. That was another advantage I hadn't fully appreciated. Even stationary, it was built to hold. Sleep changed too. I stopped thinking in terms of nights survived and started thinking in terms of sustainability. How long could I stay alert like this? How many bad nights before I made a mistake? I adjusted my routine, set specific times for stillness, for movement, for rest. I trained myself to nap in short, controlled bursts. No deep sleep unless conditions were perfect. The truck helped. It muffled the world just enough to let me reset, without disconnecting completely. I wasn't just hiding anymore. I was living small on purpose. Weapons shifted in my mind too. They stopped being tools for emergencies and started becoming tools for deterrence. Not by using them, but by not needing to. I practiced positioning instead of shooting. Angles, distances, escape routes. I didn't want to win fights. I wanted to avoid them entirely. A fight you don't have doesn't make noise, doesn't draw infected, doesn't create enemies. Long-term thinking turns violence into a liability. One night, lying on the truck floor, I realized something else. I couldn't be the only one thinking this way, which meant, eventually, I'd run into people who weren't panicking anymore, people who'd adapted, people who might notice things like a truck that never moved, never made noise, but somehow stayed intact while everything around it fell apart. That meant I'd need rules, lines, decisions made before pressure forced them. Who to avoid, who to help, when to disappear, when to stand ground. That was a future problem, but it was coming. The city outside kept decaying, but inside the truck, something solid was forming. Not hope, not optimism. Structure. I wasn't just surviving the week anymore. I was building a way to still be here when weeks turned into months. And that changed everything. It happened on a day that felt too quiet. That should have been my warning. By then, I'd learned that real silence meant one of two things. Either everything nearby was dead or everything nearby was waiting. The city didn't go quiet on accident anymore. I was inside the truck, mid-afternoon, lying flat on my back with my eyes closed, not sleeping, just resting them. The sun heated the metal walls in slow pulses, expanding and contracting like the truck was breathing. I counted those sounds, let them anchor me. Then something changed. Not a sound, an absence. The background noise I'd grown used to, the distant shuffle, the far-off moans, the wind pushing debris, thinned out like something had stepped between me and the rest of the world. I sat up slowly, listened. Footsteps. Human, measured, careful, not dragging, not panicked. Close. I shifted into position without thinking, easing myself up to the narrow gap I'd left near the rear vent. I didn't look right away. Looking too fast creates movement, and movement gets noticed. The step stopped. A shadow fell across the truck side. Someone was standing there, not touching it, just looking. That was worse. People who touch things act on impulse. People who study things are thinking. I caught a glimpse through the vent. Boots, clean enough to tell me he hadn't been running. Jeans, a backpack that sat right on his shoulders, not slung loose. He leaned in, head tilting slightly, like he was listening for something inside. I froze. My breathing slowed until it felt like I wasn't breathing at all. The man knocked, not hard, just once. A soft, deliberate tap on the steel. It echoed inside the truck like a bell. I didn't move, didn't answer, didn't shift my weight. Silence stretched. Another knock. Same pressure, same spot. Then a voice. Low, calm, close enough that I could hear the texture of it. I know someone's been using this. My heart kicked hard against my ribs, but I kept still. I'm not here to take it, he continued. Just want to talk. Nobody wants to just talk in a world like this. Talking means negotiation. Negotiation means leverage. I waited. He stepped back. I saw his shadow pull away from the truck, then return, this time lower, crouched near the wheel well. He was checking details. Tracks disturbances. Signs I'd missed. He was good. That food truck shouldn't still be standing, he said, almost to himself. Market's been closed weeks. Gang stripped everything else around here. I tightened my grip on the pistol, without raising it. He straightened up again. You don't leave trash like this untouched unless you want people to ignore it, he said. That's smart. The word hit harder than the knock. Smart people are dangerous. I'm not infected, he added. I don't bring noise. I don't bring people. I swallowed, still said nothing. Silence is power, until it isn't. He sighed softly, like someone disappointed but not surprised. All right, he said. I'll leave. He took 3 steps away, then stopped. But I'll be back tomorrow. Same time. That wasn't a threat. That was a statement. He walked off without looking back. I stayed frozen for a long time after his footsteps faded. Long enough for the sun to shift. Long enough for my muscles to start cramping. Long enough for the infected sounds to slowly creep back into the distance. Someone had seen the truck. Not as trash, not as shelter, but as intent. And once that happens, you're not invisible anymore. You're a question, and questions in this world don't stay unanswered for long. He came back the next day. Same time, same careful footsteps, same way of moving like he understood that every sound had a cost. I'd been awake for hours, of course. I didn't sleep much after that first visit. I kept replaying his voice in my head, not threatening, not pleading, controlled. That was what bothered me most. People who kept control this late into the collapse were either very smart or very dangerous. Usually both. I watched him through the vent again. Same guy, same backpack. This time he set it down gently, like he wanted me to see his hands empty. He stood a few feet back from the truck, not crowding it, eyes moving, not hunting, just reading. He waited, didn't knock, didn't speak. That was new. Silence stretched between us, thick and deliberate. He was giving me space, which meant he understood something about fear. That meant he'd lived through enough already to know when to push and when to let things breathe. Finally, I decided, not because I trusted him, because staying invisible after being seen isn't invisibility. It's surrendering the narrative. I shifted inside, slow but intentional. Let the sound carry just enough to be unmistakable. His head turned immediately toward the noise. All right, he said. Calm. Good. That's good. I cracked the rear door, maybe 2 inches. Chain still on. Just enough for my voice to travel out and his to come in. What do you want? I asked. No greeting. No name. Straight to it. He didn't smile. That would have been wrong. I want to not die, he said. Same as you. I waited. That truck, he continued, gesturing lightly, isn't just luck. You've been managing sound, movement, infected flow. People don't survive around here without doing something right. You watching me? I asked. Watching the area, he said. You happen to be the quietest thing in it. That tracked. What do you want from me? I said again, slower this time. He picked up his backpack, unzipped it just enough to show me what was inside. Not flashy. No weapons. Food, real food. Dry goods. Medical supplies. A handheld radio wrapped in cloth. I want to trade information, he said, and maybe set boundaries before this turns into something uglier. That made my grip tighten on the pistol. Explain. There's a group a few blocks east, he said. Not a gang. Not idiots. They're holding ground. They notice this place too. Right now they're curious. And later they'll decide whether curiosity turns into pressure. I stayed quiet. You staying alone makes you an unknown, he went on. Unknowns make people nervous. Nervous people make noise. Noise brings infected. That spreads problems. You their messenger? I asked. No, he said immediately. I'm independent. That's why I'm still breathing. I believe that more than I wanted to. So why you? I asked. Why not them? Because you understand something they don't yet, he said. That surviving here isn't about numbers. It's about friction, about not grinding against the world until it notices you. That hit close. He waited again. Smart. I'm not asking to join you, he added. And I'm not asking you to join us. I'm asking for an understanding. Lines drawn early. No misunderstandings later. And what do I get? I asked. He nodded, like he'd been expecting that. Advance warning, he said. If something shifts, if people start moving, if sound starts trending your way. Why help me? Because you're not expanding, he said. You're not recruiting. You're not drawing heat. People like that are stabilizing forces, whether they mean to be or not. Stabilizing forces. I hated how much sense that made. Open the door, he said, not as a command, but as a request. Chain on. We talk face to face. Or I walk away and we pretend this never happened. That was the moment, the one where I decided whether the truck stayed a hiding place or became a point on someone else's map. I looked at the chain, looked at the gap, thought about the future I'd started planning for, the one where I couldn't afford surprises anymore. I unlatched the door another inch. Not enough for him to rush. Enough for him to see my eyes. 5 minutes. I said, you talk, then you leave. He nodded once. Fair. As he stepped closer, I realized something cold and certain. He wasn't here to take my shelter. He was here because people were starting to organize. And organization, in a world like this, was either the beginning of safety or the beginning of war. I knew it was going sideways the moment he stopped talking, not because he froze, not because he reached for anything, because his eyes shifted, just a fraction, just long enough to tell me he was no longer focused on me. I felt it before I heard it. The subtle change of the air, the way attention moves when something else enters the room. My grip tightened on the pistol without me thinking about it. The chain on the door felt suddenly flimsy, like a suggestion instead of a barrier. He took a half step back. Slow. Careful. Don't move, he said quietly. Not to me. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. More than one. Too deliberate to be infected. Too spread out to be careless. I didn't look past him. Looking would have meant shifting, and shifting would have meant noise. Instead, I watched his face, watched the calculation run behind his eyes as the situation changed without his permission. You said you were independent. I whispered. I am, he said just as low. That doesn't mean I'm alone. That wasn't the same thing, and we both knew it. A voice drifted in from the side of the market building. Male, confident, not loud. There it is, the voice said. Told you it wasn't abandoned. The stranger swore under his breath. That wasn't supposed to happen, he said. They weren't supposed to follow me. They did, I said. So now what? He didn't answer right away. That told me everything. 2 more figures came into view from my limited angle. Both armed. Not sloppy about it either. Rifles held low. Fingers indexed, eyes moving. These weren't panic survivors. They weren't kids playing soldier. They were organized. One of them stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel that hadn't been there yesterday. He stopped just outside the truck's shadow, like he understood the importance of not crowding something you wanted intact. Morning, he called out. We're not here to cause problems. Nobody ever is. I felt the weight of the truck around me then. Steel walls that had kept me safe now felt like a coffin if things went loud. Gunfire would ring like thunder in here. Infected would come running from every direction. I leaned closer to the door gap. This was a private conversation, I said. The new guy chuckled softly. In a public place. That market's closed. I replied, this truck's not. Sure, he said, and we respect that. That's why we're talking instead of forcing. He glanced at the stranger beside him. Friend of yours. The stranger hesitated. That was his second mistake. We just met, he said finally. The man nodded, like that confirmed something he'd already suspected. See, he said, addressing the others. That's the kind of thing I don't like. People being cagey about resources. Makes things unstable. My finger slid inside the trigger guard. I didn't raise the gun. Yet, you followed him here. I said, which means you've been watching longer than you're admitting. He smiled at that, thin, calculating. We watch a lot of things, he said. That's how you survive. No, I said, that's how you expand. The smile faded. That was when one of the others shifted his weight. Gravel crunching louder than it needed to. Just enough to test me. Just enough to see if I'd flinch. I didn't, but the infected did. A distant moan floated in from down the block. Then another. The sound carried. Everyone heard it. The man's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the noise, then back to the truck. I could see the gears turning now. Risk versus reward. Time versus exposure. The stranger beside him spoke, quickly. This isn't worth it, he said. Not today. Too much sound already. The leader studied him for a long second. Then he looked at the truck, at the closed doors, the lack of windows, the silence inside. You're sitting on something stable, he said to me. That makes you relevant. I don't want to be, I said. He laughed again, but there was no humor in it this time. Doesn't matter. Another moan, closer now. The moment stretched thin enough to snap. Finally, he raised a hand. Not today, he said to his people. We'll talk again. He looked straight at the door. Soon. They backed away slowly, eyes never leaving the truck, then melted back around the corner of the building. The stranger didn't move until they were gone. When he finally exhaled, it sounded like pain. I didn't mean for that, he said. I know, I replied. That's why it was dangerous. He nodded. I won't bring anyone back here again, he said. I swear it. That's not enough, I said. I figured. I tightened the chain and closed the door another inch. You were right about one thing, I said. People organizing changes everything. He looked at the truck one last time. Yeah, he said, it does. When he left, I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the infected draw closer to where those men had been standing. The truck stayed quiet, but the city had noticed me now, and next time they wouldn't come to talk. After they left, I didn't move for a long time, not because I was scared, though I was, but because I needed the city to forget I existed again. Sound as a memory. So do people. If I rushed out right away, if I changed my routine too suddenly, that would leave a shape, and shapes get noticed. I waited until night, not full dark, too dangerous, but that quiet stretch just before, when the sky turned the color of old steel and the infected start settling back into whatever passes for rest. That's when I started planning how to leave Compton. Not if, how. The truck had always felt temporary, even when it was saving my life. It was a tool, not a destination. Now that someone had put eyes on it, real eyes, organized eyes, it had an expiration date. I lay on the floor and pictured the city as a grid again. On foot, I was small, invisible, flexible. I could cut through alleys, slip fences, disappear into structures. But on foot, everything I owned shrank to what I could carry, and carrying too much slowed you down. Worse, on foot, you're one bad encounter away from bleeding out in silence. In the truck, I had steel, storage, and a presence. I could move bulk, water, food, tools. I could sleep off the ground, sealed in, but the truck made noise. It had weight. It left tracks. And once it moved, it stopped being invisible. A stationary object gets forgotten. A moving one gets followed. I tested the truck at night, just a little. I eased into cab and turned the key without engaging the engine. Listened to the click. Too loud. Even that echoed in my head like a mistake. I waited, listened for a response outside. Nothing. I popped the hood the next night and checked what I'd avoided looking at for weeks. Fluids low but workable. Battery old but holding charge. Belts worn, not cracked. Tires soft but intact. It could run. That didn't mean it should. I thought about routes. Freeways were dead ends now. Too open. Too clogged. Too many places sound could travel for miles. Surface streets were better, but only at certain hours. I marked streets in my head that had collapsed structures, natural sound dampeners. Areas already burned out. Zones gangs avoided because nothing was left to take. Leaving meant passing through someone else's territory, no matter what. There was no clean way out. On foot meant caches. If I went that way, I'd need to stage supplies ahead of time. Drop points, quiet places, places nobody cared about, storm drains, rooftops, abandoned utility rooms. I started planning them slowly, not every night, not on a pattern, just enough that if I had to vanish, I could move light and still eat. I learned which shoes would last, which straps cut circulation after hours, which corners always smelled like death, and which only smelled like neglect. On foot felt possible, but fragile. The truck meant commitment. Once it moved, there was no going back to pretending it was trash. I imagined driving it through the city, engine echoing off concrete, infected turning, people looking up, calculating. I imagined getting boxed in, stalled, shot at. I imagined being trapped in my own shelter, steel walls ringing as something beat against them. Then I imagined the alternative, walking away from months of work, leaving the truck behind for someone else to claim or destroy or use against me. That hurt more than I expected. Not emotionally, practically. The truck was the only place that had ever kept me safe without asking anything in return. I slept poorly that night, dreamed of movement, of corridors closing, of streets stretching longer the farther I walked. When morning came, I knew the truth I'd been circling. Staying was no longer an option, not because Compton was unlivable, but because I had become visible. Long-term survival means knowing when you've outgrown your cover. I sat in the truck, running my hands along the steel wall, feeling the dents, the scratches, the places where it had quietly saved my life. All right, I whispered, one more job. Not scavenging. Preparation. If I left on foot, the truck would stay silent and abandoned, just another dead thing in a dead city. If I left in the truck, it would be at night, controlled, slow, with a route that avoided attention and accepted risk. I wasn't ready to choose yet, but I was done pretending I had time. The city had started organizing. So had I. I made the decision the way I made most of them now, by subtracting everything that felt good and seeing what was left. The truck felt good. That was the problem. It felt solid, familiar. It felt like control. Like if I stayed inside it, sealed up, quiet, I could keep pretending the world outside was just passing by. But control in a collapsing city is an illusion you pay for later, all at once. On foot, there was no illusion, just consequences you could see coming. I waited until the afternoon heat pressed everyone, living and dead, into stillness. Even the infected moved less when the sun sat straight overhead. Sound carried worse in heat, but movement slowed. It balanced out. I laid everything out on the truck's floor. Not everything I owned, just everything I could justify carrying. Water first. 2 liters on my back. Another split into smaller bottles, so I could ration without thinking. Food next, dense, boring stuff. Things that didn't smell. Things that didn't crumble. Tools over comfort. Knife I trusted. The handgun I'd taken off a guy who didn't need it anymore. Cleaned and wrapped to keep metal from clicking against metal. A spare magazine, not more. Weight mattered now. I left things behind slowly, deliberately. Not like abandonment, like burial. Extra clothes folded and stacked. Canned food pushed into a crate and shoved deep under prep counter. The long gun wrapped in oilcloth and hidden where only I would know to look. I wasn't gifting it to the city. I was lending it to the future, in case I ever came back. I wiped down every surface I'd touched, not because fingerprints mattered, but because patterns did. Human behavior leaves residue even when bodies don't. Before I closed the door for the last time, I stood in the truck and listened. No engine, no hum, no breath but mine. The steel walls had done their job. Now it was my turn. Going south was an instinct. It was logic. North meant hills and choke points. East meant more density, more eyes. West meant water, but also movement, boats, camps, people with plans that involved territory. South meant spread. South Central bled outward into places that were already half forgotten, stitched together by rail lines, drainage canals, industrial dead zones. Places where sound got lost, and nobody looked twice at a man walking with purpose. I didn't take the obvious roads. I cut through lots where weeds had already claimed the asphalt. over fences bent low enough to step across, along walls spray-painted with warnings that didn't mean anything anymore. The city felt different on foot, slower. Every step became a decision. Every sound had a shape. I learned to walk like I wasn't trying to get anywhere. No rush, no hesitation. Predators notice urgency. So do people. The infected reacted to sound now. Not all of them. Not always, but enough. Enough that a dropped bottle cap could turn into a problem you didn't get to explain. I passed one early. Middle of the street, head tilted, jaw working like it was chewing something invisible. I stopped before it noticed me. Waited. Counted breaths. When it turned away, I slid past a parked car and kept moving. That was the rhythm now. Pause. Observe. Proceed. By the second day, the city behind me had already started to feel like something I dreamed. Sirens were rare now. When they did happen, they didn't mean help, just motion. Gunfire, too. Short bursts, farther apart. Less anger, more fear. I avoided groups. Living ones more than dead. A group of infected made noise, but they didn't plan. A group of people did. I slept where I could disappear. Once, inside a burned-out storefront whose windows had collapsed inward, glass crunching under my feet until I learned where not to step. Another time, on a rooftop with no ladder access, just a fire escape bent enough to climb but too ugly to attract curiosity. Each morning, I moved before the light fully settled. Dawn made silhouettes. Dusk did the same. On the third day, I heard the truck again. Not my truck. Another one. Engine echoing somewhere behind me. Slow and deliberate, like whoever was driving wanted to be heard. I didn't turn around. I stepped off the street, into shadow, and waited until the sound passed. That confirmed it. I'd made the right choice. If I'd been driving, I'd have been part of that noise. A moving problem someone else would want to solve. On foot, I was just another shape the city didn't have time for. The farther south I went, the more space opened up between threats. Still dangerous. Still wrong. But less crowded with intention. I started thinking past tomorrow again. Not big plans. Just structure. How many miles I could cover without burning calories. How long I could go between water sources. What kind of places still held value now that money didn't. I stopped thinking about surviving the week. I started thinking about surviving the season. I didn't know where I was going exactly. Not yet. But I knew what I was leaving behind. A shelter that had done its job. A city that was waking up too late. And a version of myself that believed steel walls were enough. I kept moving south. Quiet. Unremarkable. Alive. That's it for today's story. We will love to see you again soon. Thanks for listening, and most importantly, stay safe out there.